Well, welcome everybody to a random walk down Mill Street. And I'm having a little trouble with my controls again here. What's going on? Okay. There we go. Welcome to a random walk down Mill Street. As I just said before I started the recording, tonight we're going to talk about the Book of Ruth and Memorial Day, two separate matters that I've put together for the purpose of this class or this presentation. And without further ado, we're just going to get right into it. So we have Shabbos coming up, but we start reading the Book of Ruth in some form here at Sheretz Israel at Lag Omer. And if you have the Daily Sabbath book from David DeSolopool, you will see that at the end of Shachrit, this is done in order to add a Kaddish. Now, one day I'm going to tell you about Kaddish, but the short history of Kaddish is that Kaddish used to be said by one person only at a time. And that's the way it still is done in Amsterdam and in the German communities that are careful to follow old Minhag Ashkenaz, like Kahal Das Ashurin, Breuers, or probably in the ER Gay in Zurich and other places like that, maybe in Amsterdam as well. The old original mourner's Kaddish was said by one mourner at a time. And so if you had a number of mourners, there would have to be a rotation. One person would do it in the beginning of Shachri, one person at the end of Shachri, one person would do it at Mincha, another person would do it at Marpit. And that's the way it's done in these traditional communities. In Sheretz Israel, we don't do that anymore, but there are remnants of it, and that is because the instructions in the prayer book say things like, if you need to add a Kaddish, say this, or say these verses to add a Kaddish in front of an Avel. Why would you need to add a Kaddish? Because you have more people saying Kaddish than Kaddishim in the prayers. So that's a remnant of that custom. At the end of Shachrit, on the daily morning service, there are verses that are said to add a Kaddish in front of an Avel. And at certain times of the year, there are different verses to be said. So before Purim, you recite verses from Esther, and before Pesach, you recite verses from Shir Hashirim. I think I've done that in this class before. And so from Lag Omer, we recite verses from the Book of Ruth. So I'm going to sing it for you. This is what we're doing every day in Shachrit today. I'm going to sing it for you so you can hear what it sounds like, but also we're going to talk a little bit about which verses are chosen as well. So here, if you can see the screen, this is I forgot what page it is, but it's like 103, 104, something like that. Vehine boaz ba mi beit lechem vayomer lakotzerim Adonai imachem vayomeru lo yibarechecha Adonai vayi bimei sefot hashofetim vayiranav ba'aretz vayelechi beit lechem Yehuda lagur b'sei Moav hu ve'ishto ושני בניו בשם האיש אלימלך בשם אשתו נעמי בשם שני בניו מחלון וחיליון אפרתים מבית לחם יהודה ויבואו שדה מואב ויהיו שם וימות אלימלך איש נעמי ותישאר היא ושני בניה Yishalem Adonai pangolech, uti maskurtech shelema, mengim Adonai Elohei Yisrael, asher bad lachasot tachar kenafav. And then the mourners would say Kaddish. Now, you may notice something quite interesting. Take a look at the translation here. And see if you can notice what Dr. Poole has done. The first verse in the verses that are said are V'hine Boaz ba mi beit lechem. And in the English it says, and it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, in the days when the judges ruled. That's not what it says. And that's because Dr. Poole put the translation in the order of the Book of Ruth. So what's going on here? The verses that we read are not in order. It starts with this verse, V'hine Boaz ba mi Beit Lechem bayomer kotzarim Adonai machem bayomer lo yivarech Adonai. That comes from the second chapter of the Book of Ruth. It's when Boaz comes and he greets the people cutting in the field, and he says Adonai machem. They say yivarech Adonai. Famous verse from the Book of Ruth, but it's not the beginning of the Book of Ruth. And the rabbis learn out actually that you're supposed to greet people with the name of God from this verse. And in the custom of Sheretz Israel, as well as other Sephardic groups, when you are called to the Torah, you go up to the Teba and you greet the people there with the words Adonai Machem, just like Boaz did. That's a total aside, nothing to do with this little custom. But it's from the middle of the Book of Ruth. And then the next verse we read, Vayhi bimei shefot hashofatim, that's the first verse of the first chapter. And we read three verses. The first three verses, Vayhi bimei shefot hashofatim, V'shem ha'ish Elimelech, and then Vayamot Elimelech ish Naomi. That's the first three verses of the Book of Ruth. Then we conclude, Yishalem Adonai pa'olech utim maschortech shalema. That's also from a little later on in the second chapter of Ruth. So why? And so then Dr. Poole didn't like that it's out of order. So his translation, he put the first three verses, and then he wrote ... He has ellipsis. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, Lord be with you. Another ... The Lord recompense thy work. That's what Boaz says to Ruth when he meets her and she's going to glean in his field, and he meets her and says that I know what you've been doing for your mother-in-law, and come reap in my field. So that's what we do every day. So to understand why these verses, it's not really going to be an explanation perfectly. I don't have a good explanation for this first and last verse, but I can show you where it comes from, and that is from Shavuot itself. So for that, we have to go take a look at the festival prayer book, and happens to be, that's the next slide. So on Shavuot, in the Spanish and Portuguese tradition, the Book of Ruth is not read at Shachrit. It's not read in the morning. It's not read before the Torah reading like most Ashkenazic places will do, and many Sephardic places too. They'll read it before the Torah reading, or after the Torah reading, or before the Torah reading. So a few different customs, but I think the main Ashkenazic custom, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but I believe the main Ashkenazic custom is after Shachrit, they read the Book of Ruth, and then you take out the Torah and you read Torah. It's a little bit unusual, but I think that's what the custom is in Ashkenazic synagogues. But that's not the custom here. Here, the custom is to read the Megillah in the afternoon, not in the morning service at all, which is a little bit of a thank God moment, because the morning service is really long. The Ten Commandments is quite a hefty thing. You have Hallel and you have a long service on Shavuot. So if you can move anything to Mincha, it's a good thing. But that's not why we read it there. But I'll tell you soon why we read it at Mincha. But I want you to take a look here. We also divide the book into two parts. Also, Ashkenazim don't do that. I think they read it on the first day. In Spanish Portuguese tradition, we read first half of Megillat Ruth on the first day, second half on the second day, before Mincha. So in the afternoon before Mincha. But take a look here. What it has, before we read the very beginning of the first verse, we say this, everyone says it together. V'hine Boaz ba mi Beit Lechem vayomer lakotzerim Adonai imachem vayomeru lo yivarechecha Adonai. That is chanted by whoever is in synagogue all together in unison. And then after that, the verses are read round robin style. So the Chazan will read the first verse, usually Rabbi Rod or Rabbi Soloveitchik or Rabbi Angel or whoever is there. The Chazan will read the first verse, and the next Chazan will read the second verse. Then it'll go in some sort of order of seniority that we try to keep, with the more senior people reading, and then the younger and junior people reading after them, verse by verse around the whole synagogue. Whoever is there gets to participate. Only men. Maybe that'll change one day, but not yet. so only men read it. And it goes around the synagogue until everyone's had a turn, whoever wants to have a turn. And then it goes back, and you do the whole order again, verse by verse by verse throughout the whole synagogue. But there is this introduction where you say Vihine Boaz before you read the Book of Ruth, and that is what's done on the weekdays as well. So what we saw earlier, we start with this introduction, and when you get to the end of the day's reading, which is beginning of the third chapter, I think, you have this closing thing, Yishalem Adonai Pa'olech Uti Maskortech Shlema, which you've already read in the text itself in the middle of the second chapter. But when you get sort of like about the sixth or seventh verse in the third chapter, you end and you say, and everyone sings, whoever has the last verse ends, and then everyone joins in together. Yishalem Adonai Pa'olech, like we began, everyone in unison with this closing verse. So that's what you do on a little mini recital of the Book of Ruth that we do every day from Lag BaOmer until Lag Lang Omer until Shavuot, where you read the first opening and the closing, and the first three verses take the place of the whole Book of Ruth every morning after Shachrit. There's one other thing I want to point out to you, and again, I don't actually. There's probably a halachic reason for this, but Dr. Poole is careful in the rubrics to say, and you might have noticed it already, that the custom is to read after the Azharot, which we're going to talk about next week, before Mincha, Korim Chatzi HaMegillah B'Te'amim, with the notes, with the Masoretic notes, the musical notes that we see here. And that's what it means to have a public reading of the Torah, is to read it b'te'amim. So I guess he's trying to warn you shouldn't just read it without knowing how to read it. You can't just read it, declare it. It has to be chanted according to the trope. So where does this custom of dividing it into two come from? It's not so well known. Himanim do it, I believe. A few other Sephardic groups, but most not. And we do it here at Spanish Portuguese. And one of the things you immediately notice is that this is a custom that is for Galut, because in Israel, Shavuot is one day. So you can't divide the book in two parts and read it twice. Or maybe you can. So let's take a look at where this source comes from. So I'm going to read to you something from Masechet Sofrim. Masechet Sofrim is it's one of the they call it Masechtot Ketaniot, the minor tractates. It's post-Talmudic, it's Gaonic era, it's pre-Gaonic era, it's Saboraic era. I don't know. It's somewhere lands between the Gaonim and the Talmud itself. It's a work about prayer ritual and reading of the Torah, and it's chock full of customs that are interesting, and some of which we do, and some of which we don't do. Anyway, here it's talking about Megillah, reading Megillah. The Megillah, Akol Ksher in the Krot, it's a Megillah. Everyone is kosher to read the Megillah. It's talking about Megillah Esther. Chutz micheresh, shotev v'katan. Deaf person, a person who is an imbecile or a minor. Rabbi Yehuda machshir v'katan. Rabbi Yehuda says even a minor can read, is kosher to read the Megillah. That means to read it publicly for everyone's benefit, I guess. Amar Rabbi Levi, Megillat Esther tzarich likrota b'layla v'lishnota b'yom. For Megillat Esther, you have to read it both in the evening and in the day. Shne'emar, L'man yizamecha chabod v'lo yidom, L'man yizamecha chabod b'layla v'lo yidom b'yom. This is the verse from Tehillim, which we say all the time. L'man yizamecha chabod v'lo yidom, Adonai Elohai l'olam adeka. But the verse is talking about praising God and not being silent, and praising God all the time. And so the rabbis learn out from that it has to, whenever you have these prayers at night, at day, you have to have praise of God, which is learning Torah or reading Torah. It's a midrashic explanation for why they're reading Torah at various times. And now there's a little story. Rabbi Meir when once Rabbi Meir was walking by in the synagogue, walking in front of the synagogue in the street, Shama Klehon Desidra. He heard that the voices from inside the synagogue are reading Torah, reading a portion of the Torah, the Sidra. Amar, he says to them, Ad matai atem osim et Torah kuriyot. How long are you going to read this in pieces for? You're going to read a little bit of the Torah here, a little bit of the Torah there. Amruleh, they say back to him, Mishum yizamecha chabod, like the verse that we just quoted. This is, we're always supposed to, whenever we gather for Torah, for prayers, we're supposed to read a little bit of the Torah. They're trying to tell him. And so he says, okay, v'shavkun or v'shvakin. He says, okay, he permitted it. And then it tells you, v'nahagu ha'am lomar kein lo'omra b'motzei shabbatot shel adar. And the custom of the people was to say the Megillat Esther, on the Sabbath eve, or the evening of the Sabbath. I'd say Motzei Shabbat of Adar ad she'avru chamisha asar. So the first two Shabbatot, in the evening of the Shabbat, they would recite the Megillat Esther, not on Purim itself. And then it tells you, Umikri Hechi Kri, how did they read it? Shabbat Rishonah Shel Adar, on the first Shabbat, at the end of the first Shabbat, Korin Ha'am Biyachad, everyone read together, Ad Balayla Hahu, the first half of Megillat Esther. Motzei Shabbat Shniya, and on the second Shabbat of Adar, Korin Ha'am Biyachad, they would all read together, Ad V'dover Shalom V'lechol Zaro, the end of the Megillah, second half. So here is a little bit similar to what our custom is. They read half of it on the first Shabbat, half of it on the second Shabbat, but not what we know today as the custom for reading Megillah. But then it continues. B'shir Hashirim, Korino Tov B'leila Yamim Tovim Shel Galiyot Achronim, Chetzio B'layla Echad, V'chetzio B'layla Hasheni. Tells you a Shir Hashirim, which is read on Pesach. In the Galut, they would read half on the first day, half on the second day, which is our custom. Ruth, which we're going to have Shavuot, b'motzei Yom Tov Rishon Shel Atzeret Ad Chetzio, u'mashlim b'motzei Yom Tov Ha'acharon. And then he goes on about different customs about how it's supposed to be read, when it's supposed to be read. But the source for our custom of reading it in the afternoon and on half on the first day, half on the second day, comes right out of Masechet Sofrim, which means it's pretty ancient. It's really quite ancient. Maybe it's not from the Second Temple period, or maybe it is. I don't know. But it's from the days of Chazal, days of the Talmudic era or post-Talmudic era, likely in Babylonia, not in Israel, because they didn't have 2 days of Yom Tov in Israel. There was one other thing I was going to tell you about this, which is my uncle is a rabbi in Israel. His name is Aris Gedalia, and he started a Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in the Old City. This is many years ago. Still meets today in the Istanbuli synagogue in the Old City. It's called Sha'arei Ratzon, and it's a collection of Spanish and Portuguese expatriates from Amsterdam, from London, from New York, from Philadelphia, who come together to pray. They pray Shabbat Mevarachim HaChodesh, and on the holidays, and they come together in the Old City and they pray. Now, the Spanish Portuguese people they're a little bit eccentric, and they are very makpid on their minhagim. So much so that if it says it in the Sidur, that is the minhag. And so my uncle told me that he came to Shavuot, and the first day of Shavuot they were meeting, and they got to the end of the first half and of Megillat Ruth, and some people wanted to continue because there is no second day, but they were prevented from doing so by the staunch traditionalists. Said, no, this first day you end here. So they only read the first half of the Book of Ruth. I don't think that's what they do today, but that has happened in the past with in Israel. Okay, that is what I wanted to share with you about Megillat Ruth and Masechet Soferim and our custom here in New York. It also happens to be one of the more beautiful melodies. The Book of Ruth, I think, is my favorite of all the Megillot, of the tropes. So maybe we'll do a little bit again next week to get another sense of it. That's what I'm talking about, Megillat Ruth. Now we're going to move on to Memorial Day. So Monday is Memorial Day, and here at Sheretz Israel, we observe Memorial Day. Memorial Day is used to be called Armistice Day, or it's the end of World War One, and then it was made into a day that we would remember those service members who died during the war. It became Memorial Day. In Europe, they wear red poppies. In America, you don't see that much, but you see a lot of American flags in America on that day. And we have a special ceremony that we've been doing since then. I think Memorial Day actually started before then. I think it started actually. There are pre World War One celebrations for those who died in the Civil War, but I have to do more research for that. But anyway, Sheretz Israel started a Memorial Day service in the 1920s and has been doing it ever since. And it's really a remarkable service. And I encourage you all to come if you haven't been there. We go down to our first cemetery, which is in Lower Manhattan, and we decorate the graves of veterans or patriots of the American Revolution. And in that cemetery are buried 18 or 19 patriots of the American Revolution. I say patriots because not all of them were veterans. Some people are associators or patriot people who support the patriot cause, but who didn't actually serve in the military. People like I forget his name, but there's somebody who clothed Lafayette's troops and gave loans to the United States Army and important things. I think it was Joshua Isaacs, or maybe one of the I forget. And no, maybe it was Baruch Judah. But anyway, important things for the cause, but not who didn't actually serve in the military. So the patriots of the American Revolution. And it's great. We have a color guard from the Veteran Corps of the Artillery of the state of New York. We have a color guard from Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York, which are Francis Tavern. It's a lot of fun. It's meaningful and it's fun when the weather's nice. When the weather's not so nice, it doesn't feel as fun. But hopefully the weather will be nice this Monday. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. I want to encourage you to come if you haven't been, and if you can't be, if you're in a different state, Maimon, or others, I encourage you to watch it online. I'm going to live stream it on our Facebook page, so look out for that on Monday morning. Last year we live streamed it on YouTube. This year we're going to live stream it on Facebook, a little less professionally than last year because it's going to be done on my phone, but it should still capture just about everything pretty well. What I want to talk to you tonight about is what Memorial Day is really all about, and that is remembering those who gave their lives in service to the United States. The best way to talk about that is to give you some examples. There are quite a few, not a huge number from our congregation that I'm aware of, still researching some, but there are 9, 10 people who died in service from our congregation. I'm going to talk about 4 of them tonight. And I'm going to talk about those who died in World War I. Now, this is a picture of the main sanctuary in Sheretz Israel. And I want you to take a look at these 4 lamps here. One here, here, and here. When I was growing up, these were lit every single Shabbat. They were always lit. Almost like the Ner Tamid. They were always lit. They're gas lamps that were made, they're part of the design of the synagogue. In 1999, they renovated the synagogue. Maybe it's 2004, I forget. But they in the early 2000s or late 1990s, I think it was 2004, they renovated the synagogue. And they found that some of these gas lines that were feeding these lamps were a little faulty, not efficient, maybe had gas leaks or prone to leakage. And they turned them off, much to my, sad. I was sad to see them go. Nowadays, it's hard to even remember what they were like when they were lit, but they used to be lit every single Shabbat. Anyway, the reason I'm mentioning them is because these were rededicated in a ceremony in 1921 in memory of 4 sons of our congregation who died in World War I. And I'm going to tell you about them tonight. So the first person that I'm going to mention is Adolf Youngman. Adolf Youngman was the son of Charles and Natalie, also known as Tali Youngman. And they were not Sephardic, but they were members of Sheretz Israel because they lived at 43 West 70th Street, right down the block from the synagogue. And this was their synagogue. He served as a private in the 36th Service Company of the Signal Corps in the United States Army and died in Saint-Nazaire, France at the age of 26 and was buried in the American Cemetery in France, and his grave is there today. And this is a picture of him, Adolf Youngman. I don't believe he has, I don't think he was married, and I don't think he had any children, though I am not 100% sure of that. And so he's the first of these 4. The next one is James Hendricks Florence. Here's a picture of him. This is his grave. James Hendricks Florence was a descendant of Harmon Hendricks, so he comes from a very prominent and old Sheretz Israel family. He served as a corporal in the Transportation Corps of the United States Army. He died at Fontainebleau, France, March 1919 at the age of 37. So he was older than your average recruit. There was a draft, and I don't know, I think he was probably a volunteer at the age of 37. He was probably not a draftee, but that's James Hendricks Florence. I don't think they died in any military action. I think one of them died in an accident. That might have been James Hendricks Florence. It might have been a car accident. And Youngman, I think, got sick and died from his illness, which is a little bit different than the next 2 that we're going to read about. Next one is Frank Julius Felbel. You can see his picture here. Frank Julius Felbel was born in New York to Ada and Jacob Felbel. He was from an old Sephardic family as well, the Benjamin family. His mother's family went all the way back, and he was a descendant of Benjamin Mendy-Satius, who was a brother of our minister Gershom Mendy-Satius. Benjamin Mendy-Satius was a veteran of the American Revolution, so he was a son of the American Revolution. And Benjamin Mendy-Satius was also a signer of the Buttonwood Agreement, so his ancestor was one of the people who founded the New York Stock Exchange. So Frank attended Columbia, where he was on the board and the editor-in-chief of the Jester, which was, I guess, one of the newspapers. He graduated Columbia Law School in 1913. And you can read about him on the Columbia's website, where they memorialize all their graduates who died in service to the United States. He was a second lieutenant in the 28th Infantry Regiment. He was acting as captain, meaning the captain had died and he took over those roles, and was killed in the Argonne Forest at daybreak on October 4th, 1918, while leading his company in an attack on the German line. He's buried in France. Frank Julius Felbel. And lastly, of the four, a man named Julian Strasberger. Julian Strasberger was born in Alabama to Leo Strasberger and his, oh, where's his mother's name? Oh, I don't have it here, but I should. Oh well. His mother, I think it was Adele Friedman. Definitely last name was Friedman. I don't know if it was Adele or not, but so Julian Strasberger was not himself a member of Shearith Israel, but his mother was. His mother was the daughter of Colonel Max Friedman, who was a veteran of the Civil War, and quite an interesting person in his own right. Colonel Max Friedman, we could talk about another day. And he was married, and his parents were married in Shearith Israel by Dr. Mendes in the synagogue, in our synagogue today, in the main sanctuary of our synagogue. And they had a son named Julian. They went to live in Alabama, which is where Mr. Strasberger was from. He got a law degree from the University of Alabama and was practicing law when World War I broke out, and he joined the 4th Regiment of Alabama Machine Gun Company. He served as a first lieutenant on the Mexican border until the declaration of war in Germany. He was made a acting judge advocate and a lawyer in the Rainbow Division, and then judge advocate of the 167th Infantry, where he served as an adjutant to General Robert A. Brown. He was an officer, and he writes this amazing letter to his family. It's a long letter. This is just a small excerpt of it that kind of pulls at your heartstrings. He writes to his mother, "Don't worry about me. I'm having the time of my young life. If the end has to come, wouldn't you rather it be for the cause I am fighting for, doing something for my country up to the last minute, and passing peacefully away in a luxurious bed under your ministering care? I would 1,000 times." And the terrible, sad thing about this letter is that is what happened, where he was killed in the Battle of the Marne on July 26, 1918, while attacking German-held Croix Rouge farm. He's buried in France, but then his family transferred his body back to Alabama, where he has a memorial. He's buried in a cemetery in Alabama, and he has a silver star. Take a look at this citation. It doesn't tell you all about everything that he did, like modern citations do. It says, by direction of the President and the provisions of the Act of Congress approved 1918, Captain Julian Strasberger of the United States Army is cited posthumously by the commanding general of the American Expeditionary Forces for gallantry in action, and a silver star may be placed upon the ribbon of the victory medals awarded him. Captain Strasberger distinguished himself by gallantry in action while serving in the 167th Infantry, in action near Croix Rouge Farm, and by his brilliant leadership. And so, yeah, he was a young man when he died. I was in contact with his family. He has, I don't know if it's his direct descendants or descendants of his sister and brother, but the family is still prominent and lives in Alabama, and they sent me some, I think of this picture they sent me, as well as some other items about him a couple of years ago when I was writing the honor roll for our congregation. And that's my presentation for you tonight, just to bring what Memorial Day is really all about. It's not all about flags and having a day off from school. It's remembering those who died in service to our country. And I'm closing with this picture just because I found it was the only one I could find where you could see these lamps lit. Last year, I asked John, our superintendent, to light them, and so he turned the gas on, and he waited an hour, and the two on the left were able to light up. The two on the right were not operational, so we can't light them. But maybe one day we'll be able to do it again, especially on Memorial Day, and remember what they're for. And that's my presentation for you tonight. I hope you enjoyed. Next week we are going to talk about the Book of Ruth, and I'm sorry, we're going to look at Azharot and Shavuot and customs of Shavuot. So stay tuned for that. Flowers in the synagogue. I have some great pictures to show you. So come back next week for that. And if you're in the New York area, or even if you're not, tune in for the Memorial Day service on Monday morning at 10:30 a.m. at the Chatham Square Cemetery. If you can come in person and you want to know how, contact me. If you can't come in person and want to know how to watch it, you can contact me. But the short answer is it'll be on Shereth Israel's Facebook page. Okay. If you haven't yet counted the Omer, we can do so together right now. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sefirat haomer hayom arba'im yom haomer shehem chamisha shavuot v'chamisha yamim harachaman yachazir avodat beit hamikdash limkoma b'mhera b'yameinu Lam naseach in ginot mizmor shir Elohim yichonenu v'barechenu Ya'er panav itanu sela v'dagat ba'aretz darkecha Bechol goyim yeshuatecha yoducha namim Elohim yoducha namim kulam yismechu viranenu leumim ki tishpot namim mishor ulumim ba'aretz tanchem sela yoducha namim Elohim yoducha namim kulam eretz natzena yebula Yevarechenu Elohim Eloheinu Yevarechenu Elohim Ve'yireu oto kol afsei haaretz. With that, I'm going to say good night. I'm going to stop the share and turn off the recording and allow. Oh, I didn't look at the chat. Let's see here. Veterans Day was originally Armistice Day. That's correct. Thank you. It didn't sound right when I was saying it, but I think Memorial Day actually was originated with the Civil War, which occurred to me as I was fumbling through that presentation. Okay. I should have said that after I stopped recording. Whoa.